Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on how to migrate to Australia. It's great to have you all on board from all over the world, and it's great to have our two panelists on with us as well to give you a rundown of how to move to Australia in these really interesting times. In fact, I would argue that this is one of the best times to move to Australia, and because the demand for people is so high. So we'll get onto that in a moment, but first of all, I want to introduce you to our two panelists, Nazim Lalazari, who's our head of immigration, Mara agent. Nazim, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name is Nazim, and as advised, I'm a registered migration agent for Australia. I'm originally from Sydney, so some would argue the best city in the world. I think Brett might agree with me. And I've been working in for over 10 years, helping migrants like yourselves make the move down under. So I'm excited to talk to you about what that process looks like at the moment.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nazim. And Brett McAdam, who's in Sydney right now, Sydney based, New Zealand born. Brett, if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. So I'm a Kiwi living in Australia. Look, I'm very much in recruitment for the past, 10 years now. And also lived in the UK and Ireland, so I know what it's like to live overseas, look for a job overseas, go through a visa process. Call Sydney home now, and very involved with connecting offshore talent that it's making its way down to Australia to employers across a number of industries, from finance through to mining, locations right across Australia.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brett. Yeah, so as I said, my name is Scott Matheson. I'm the co-founder of Working In. We've been helping people move to Australia for over 20 years now. It's a love game. We love doing this. We really enjoy helping people from all around the world relocate. We know it's a massive job. What we also notice is that right now, post-COVID, it's not quite post-COVID, but we're getting to post-COVID, is probably one of the better times to move. Over the course of the last 2 years, a good 500,000 people left Australia and went back home. And of course, Australia's borders have been shut for 2 years. And so what's happening now is that as Australia tries to grow its economy out of the COVID environment, it's short of people. Employers throughout the country are short of people. And of course, therefore, what does Australia do? It turns to skilled migration. And so we've never seen such demand for skills as we're seeing now. And we're seeing Australia really start to talk about the need for, up to 2 million migrants needed over the next 5 years. So it really is a good time for you to be listening to this. We always talk about windows of opportunity, migration windows open and close, and certainly right now and over the next couple of years, the windows will definitely be open if you have the skills and if you are prepared. So today's a lot about what do you need to do to get to migrate to Australia? What are the visa policies? What do I need to do in terms of getting ready? How do I get a job? And how do I ultimately get down here to enjoy the lifestyle? So welcome again. I can see that there's people from all around the world here, which is absolutely fantastic. And we hope that we can help you on your journey. So first things first, I think, Brett, you're in Sydney. We're just having a chat offline before. I believe Melbourne, for example, has been in the longest lockdown in the world. What is the current scenario around COVID, lockdowns, and the general feeling in Australia?
Yeah, interestingly, Melbourne's about to come out of lockdown, I think, at midnight tonight. Sydney's just come out of lockdown about a week ago, so we're definitely getting back to normal here. And New South Wales is really, in particular, pushing ahead, very much, keen to open up their borders as soon as possible. The state government's probably getting a little ahead of the overall federal government in terms of that, but it's getting increasingly easier firstly for the Australians to get back into Australia, but now it'll be obviously skilled migrants, tourists, and that side of things. So everything's moving in the right direction down here. Places like WA and Queensland, in terms of internally within Australia, that's locked off to the rest of Australia because they are COVID free. And that's sort of something that's still ongoing down here to when the whole country opens up so you can travel freely around the country. But overall, certainly on the East Coast, the two main cities, Sydney's out of lockdown, Melbourne's coming out midnight tonight, and, things are all heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
Happen and yeah, it's good stuff.
Okay, good, Brett. And you're out on the eastern beaches in Sydney, right?
Yeah, so I'm in a good spot. Everyone's probably seen Bondi Beach in the news for all the wrong reasons during lockdown. So I'm a few beaches down from Bondi Beach. So it's a good spot. So it's pretty popular. It's definitely very popular with people that come into Australia from overseas. We get a lot of people who just base themselves here for that first initial week or two, and then obviously move out to where they're going to in Australia. But a lot of people, first home in Australia is actually around the eastern suburbs. Around one of the beaches, Bondi, Coogee, Bronte. I know I did it when I first came to Australia many years ago at a flat in Bronte for about 20 Irish guys. That was my first port of call when I got here. I'm sure not everyone's doing that though. I don't recommend that really.
No, I think we're talking about a different audience here. And talking about a different audience, Nazim, really I think the key here is this is a skills-led recovery from Australia. So skills is what we're after. How do the skill visas work? Because there are numerous categories for Australia. Can you give us a very brief overview of the options that our audience today can actually understand?
Yeah. So I think traditionally everyone's probably mostly heard of or been aware of the subclass 189 or 190. These are skilled-based general skilled migration they're referred to. And so what the Australian government has done is that it's got a list of different occupations, and then depending on which of those lists your occupation sits, you have different visa options. So traditionally most people have done the 189 or the 190. The 189 is the independent pathway. So that means that you have an occupation on the MLTSSL, which is, the way I would describe it is those occupations that the government has identified are absolutely required everywhere in the country. They really just want to let everybody who can fill those roles to come in and settle in Australia. The subclass 190, this is for occupations that maybe don't have the same level of need sort of federally, but within certain states, those states might have gone to the government and said, look, we definitely need people in these skills in our state, and we want to be able to sponsor them or nominate them to come and live and work within our state. So sometimes where people don't have enough points, they might look to the subclass 190 to get those extra points and then push them along that migration journey faster. And then as you sort of go down in the list, you've got something called the subclass 494. It's a provisional visa. It's employer sponsored. You might have to live out in a region for 3 years before you get your permanent residency. And again, you can get more points because in some very specific parts of the country, there might be the regions have gone to the government and said, look, we're really, really desperate for these particular skills. So we want to make it easier for those people to come and live and settle where they're most needed. So these are the main sort of skilled visas that we see that are sort of, migrant-led. Obviously, you need, under the 494, you've got different categories. One of those could be based on a job, but most people will migrate to Australia under the subclass 189 and 190 categories. And I guess it's important to note that obviously your dependent family members can migrate with you. And so you move as a family. And so the idea being that you settle as a family, because that's what contributes to the growth that the Australian government's trying to achieve.
Fantastic. And you mentioned the MTSSL. Can you explain what that acronym means? Because the SSLs are really important, right?
Yeah, there's actually a whole bunch of lists. So the MLTSSL stands for the Medium Long-Term Skilled Occupation List. And that list covers the 189 and the 190, pretty much every other list, if you think about it. The 190 specifically will include occupations that might only be on the short-term list. So it's the short-term skilled occupation list. That's a little bit harder to rattle off the acronym for that. And then you've got the further regional occupation lists as well that just refer to regional occupation lists as role. So that's a little bit easier too.
Yeah. So look, Nazim, I think for our listeners, what I'm hearing is that there's different categories of visas depending on your skills, your experience, and the demand for that skill set. So if you potentially miss out on one, like the 189, you don't have enough criteria, you could defer to the 190 or other visa classes. And so really understanding that from the get-go is fundamentally important. Otherwise, you're wasting time and wasting money, right?
Absolutely. If you don't understand what options you have and how you're going to navigate that process, you can't really get started, and you can't make sure that you're putting all the energy and effort and resource, behind a process that can be achieved.
Yeah. So look, folks, for everyone who's listening here, a big thing about what we do is we say that you need to know right from the very get-go what pathway you're going to go down, because we have seen so many instances where people have gone down one pathway and then realize, actually, I can't do this because I might need a skills assessment, or I might need a professional body registration, or whatever it might be, or I've got some illness that stops me. So it's really, really critical to spend a little bit of money up front to understand exactly who you are and what category that you sit in. Is that fair enough, Nazim?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if once people understand what they do or don't have to do to qualify, it makes it a lot easier to then move on to the next steps. We've come across individuals over the last 10 years where they couldn't necessarily obtain that required skills assessment first off. We found a way sometimes, whether it was with a little bit of further work experience, or I can remember a gentleman a few years ago who had to just go and do a couple of extra papers so that he could qualify. Kevin, if you're out there, hello. It's good to know that you've got citizenship now in Australia. And then we've got other people where we've realized that, an easier way to get them to qualify is, maybe we get their registration first, and then we use that to get the skills assessment so that we're moving along the path. I think it's really, really important to understand that Australian migration can be quite tricky. There's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of different requirements that need to be met at various parts of the process. Sometimes we're able to make those connections in a way that will get you to the end result faster, because that's what our job is to do, to make it that we're, helping our clients along in that process. So I think that's why doing that first step is so important. If there is a way that we can make it work, we're going to let you know so that you can then, decide how you want to proceed.
Yeah, look, and I think the point that you make about speed is really important, and I think this dovetails onto Brett, because what we're seeing is a huge demand of people that want to move to Australia, and as soon as the borders actually do open and the world cottons on that Australia is open to skilled migrants, then there will be a rush. Now, that hasn't happened yet, but we are anticipating that. So a big thing that we're discussing is get ahead of that queue, get ahead of that very large demand so that you're at the front of the processing queue. But it also means get the first bites at the jobs, because there's only so many jobs available, and you really want to be first in to apply for those jobs. Brett, what is the job market like there right now in Sydney and in other parts of the country? Not everyone wants to live in Sydney, obviously, but WA, South Australia. Can you give us an overview of what employers are going through right now and what the demand is for skill migration?
Yeah, I mean, you really can't go too far without reading about different skill shortages in different industries, across the states. That's also not just in the metro, your Melbourne and Sydney areas, but like out in the regional WA. You hear about mining in WA, massive shortages there because they can't get skilled people in, not even from overseas, but also interstate at the moment. So really suffering from skill shortages. construction industry. I mean, a lot of people from offshore were working in the construction industry as well that have gone back. But it's right across. I mean, I could literally walk out of my house in Sydney and see signs outside restaurants asking about chefs, people to work in hospitality. So it's, hospitality, mining, construction, finance, IT. I've got quite a few friends in recruitment in Australia, different sort of industry verticals as well. And the candidate market is just so dry across the board for them that they can't find people. So it's a very limited pool of people for employers to look at the moment with the borders shut. So there's a lot of strong interest, obviously, for people out there at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that is true. And one thing you didn't mention, of course, is healthcare and the demand for, all manner of health professionals across the whole, the health area. We have our own health recruitment team here that places people into Australia. And, I think, Nazim, you were talking to a mental health nurse this morning. And of course, they don't even need a job to get into Australia. They straight in on the 109. So, that's really fortuitous for them. They're one of the skills that are on that very specific list. But, some nurses aren't and some nurses are. So again, it's a really good reason to actually check out whether you meet that criteria. Brett, one thing that you did mention about is look, not everybody wants to move to Sydney or Brisbane or the main centres, and they might want to move regionally. For some people, if they want to move to Australia, they have no choice. Nazim, I know you did talk about that, but can you just explain the whole regional visa thing in a little bit more detail, especially that there's a list that comes out every year? Because I think that's really important for a lot of people.
Yeah, so what the requirements are is that different regions will have their own lists, and then they've got further requirements for who they'll nominate under those occupations. So every occupation will have a slightly different requirement depending on which region might be looking to support someone in that role, like in that occupation. So the requirements aren't always the same. Sometimes they want you to have specific experience. Sometimes they might require you to have a job in that region. Sometimes they just want to know that, you can support yourself if you move there, because it means that you'll settle in and you're going to help grow that local community. So part of what we do as part of that skills, that eligibility assessment is once we've identified, number one, the occupation you can nominate and that you can get the positive skill assessment, we look at all the different states, all the different regions, and we talk in quite a bit of detail what you need to do in order to be able to get, that support from that region or state in order to move your application along. The amount of requirements are so varied because it really does depend on your specific occupation and that particular area. So we could probably sit here for 12 hours and just list, one occupation across all the different states. So I'll spare you the boring details, but it's not boring when it's related specifically to you and what you need to do, because it gives you the tools to get yourself ready to fit those requirements.
Yeah, but it's also good to know that it may be that in order to get to Australia, you might need to, or your only path might be through some sort of state-sponsored or regional pathway, and then you've got to spend a certain amount of time there. It's 2 years, right? 3 years, sorry. Yeah. And so 3 years
for regional.
For regional.
2 for state.
2 for state. Yeah. So look, what we've also noted is that a lot of people think, oh, that's the pathway I'm going to take, and as soon as my 3 years is up or my 2 years for state, I'm going to move to the big, city. But then they become enamored with where they're living and part of the community and just stay there. So our experience is be very open to the opportunities, because you never really know where they might end up for you. The unexpected can also be really enjoyable and very fulfilling. So Brett, back to you. I know that you've been dealing with a lot of engineering type companies. and there's a list called the PIMSOL list with specific people on that. I'll ask Nazim to talk about the PIMSOL list, but you are needing, I guess, or your clients are needing engineers. Can you talk about that in a little more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right across Australia, most states have a massive government-led spend in infrastructure at the moment, which has resulted in, huge shortages of civil engineers, but also, construction project managers right across the board. So that there's the spend that's been going into it is they're calling it sort of once in a generation type spending in infrastructure at the moment. This was happening before the pandemic, but I feel this has sort of even been ramped up. So roads, and you can even see it in the skyline when you go into the city where I am, Sydney as well. Last time I was in Melbourne, which was a while ago. There's so many cranes. So there's lots happening. There's lots of money going into that. And look, a lot of things have been sort of on and off and on hold as well. And people have deadlines to meet. So they need people basically. So there's definitely a big push towards engineers to help out those infrastructure projects around the country.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this PIMSOL list is that it is I think there's 42 occupations on that list now. And they are the occupations that the Australian government has identified as the most in demand and most critical occupations that Australia needs currently. And visas for processing PIMSOL occupations are being approved in a matter of weeks. So if you do meet those requirements for that occupation and you're under 45 and you've got 3 years postgraduate experience, then it's highly likely that you'll qualify for PIMSOL, and the visa can actually be approved within about 12 weeks. So you might be thinking, gosh, it's going to take me a year or two to get to Australia. For some people, the opposite is true. And realistically, you could be here in February or March. Nazim, do you want to expand on anything that I've said, being the Mara agent, around that PIMSOL list? Anything that I might have missed out?
Yeah, so I think what's important to note is that the PIMSOL list is those that are, as Scott said, so critical that the government decided they were going to make basically an exception to the closed borders. Now, we know that might not, stay the case, because over the next 6 months, the borders will be opening in a gradual phase. Brett alluded to the New South Wales Premier deciding that they were open for business before the Prime Minister said, well, slow that down a bit, I control the borders. But what we can see is that there's definitely going to be a move to everything being quite a bit easier. But if you are one of those occupations that is on PIMSOL, you can feel even more confident that, one, there is a pathway for you, and two, it's going to be easier for you than it will be potentially for anybody else. But you do need to be prepared. So, the timeframes that Scott's referring to doesn't necessarily refer to time you might need to put aside to obtain your skills assessment. That's separate. That can take 3 to 4 months on its own, depending on your occupation and the specific skill assessing authority. If you're a nurse, obviously you need to add registration to that process. So it's just a guide, and it's important to understand that depending on who you are and what you do, there'll be several steps and they'll have their own processing times. And Scott, you referred to people being under 45 with at least 3 years experience. The reason we give that as a general or broad requirement is because it generally means that you're going to be able to meet, for most occupations, the skill assessment requirements in order to get a positive outcome. Some you don't need any experience, but for almost most occupations you do. And so that's just a general ballpark for you to consider if you do want to be migrating to Australia.
Yeah. If you are thinking, do I or do I not qualify here, we have a free assessment form. You simply fill it in. We'll let you know whether we think that you meet criteria or if you don't. We genuinely do not want people to waste their time or their money or their energy or get their hopes up if they don't meet the criteria. and we'll be quite straight about that, and there's no charge around that. If you do meet the criteria, or you look as though you meet the criteria, we'll let you know, and then we'll have a further consultation with Nazim or one of our other Mara agents, and then you can do a more in-depth, what we call a warrant of fitness. It's really understanding you in a lot more depth to make sure that not only you meet the criteria, but to understand which pathway is the best possible pathway for you. So there's a bit of a process. We've done this a lot. We believe it's the most fair process because right up front, there's very little expenditure, but it also gives you clarity whether you choose to use us or whether you choose Brett to help you find a job. So getting that clarity up front is absolutely important. And then you can go ahead and start gathering all those documents, because my word, it can take a long time to get all those documents together. And really, this is one of the most frustrating parts for most people. So, your original qualifications, for example, Nazim, you could probably explain some of the scenarios you've had with original documentations, and people having to get those documents from their original universities can be very time consuming in COVID. Nazim, have you got comments around that? Because I know that you're dealing with it quite recently.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, not every single occupation needs every single document to be original, but there's always that one person who says, oh, I threw that out, or I don't have a copy of it when we do need it. And it just holds the process up. And we appreciate how frustrating that can be, because once you start the process, everyone's really excited and you want to keep pushing things along. And when you're waiting on a third party to give you, a copy of something that you think, oh, maybe I left it in my mum and dad's attic, and then they go, oh no, we chucked out all your boxes years ago. You've got to add the extra time and potentially extra money just to go and get these bits and pieces. So if you are really keen, you really do need to start the process as soon as possible to factor in all these unbudgeted, time delays as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and we won't go into registration too much, but there are a lot of occupations that do require registration, which you mentioned before, particularly in the health industry. Yes?
Yep.
Yeah.
Almost every single health occupation requires registration.
Yeah, which we can assist you with. I think the main message today is that if you are keen to move to Australia, you do want to move to Australia, take the first step, fill in the free assessment form. At least that will give you some idea. If it's negative, then you might have some work to do. If it's positive, then it might give you some energy to take the next step after that. Have a chat to Brett or have a chat with Nazim, and understand what does it mean to move to Australia. What's it like living in Sydney? Nazim's originally a migrant herself, and her family's a migrant. And you showed us a wonderful photo of the day that your parents moved from the US to Australia 40 years ago. And, everyone's got a story, right?
Yeah, so this is me as the baby being held by a family friend, which is a family friend now. I don't know how well my parents actually no, I think my dad was friends with her back in Iran before my parents met in the US, where I was born. Now, my dad, who's that suave gentleman in the white coat sitting on the fence there, he had a job with IBM. So we were able to migrate to Australia effectively as skilled migrants, an earlier version of the current sort of policy. So that photo's in Hurstville. I believe it's actually called Carrington Avenue on Hurstville. There's my mum holding the stuff with the nappy bag. She was tired. She said it took 3 planes and 2 days to get from Chicago to Sydney, where I grew up. So, yeah.
That's the wonderful thing. And well, it's only 20 hours on a plane and a couple of Chardonnays now, isn't it?
Much easier now.
So, Brett, before we sign off, because I'm very aware of people's evenings, do you have any last words or advice that you'd like to impart?
Yeah, like you say, Scott, I'd say just take those first steps. See if you're eligible for a visa, and then obviously if you are eligible to get into the country, then just carry on with that. Get in touch with us. Our approach in terms of helping you find a role down here, it's a big country. There's lots of opportunities. So we just want to, what are you looking for? Where do you want to live? Do you even know that yet? What type of company suits you? Whereabouts in Australia? And then put together a recruitment plan around that for what you're looking for. And hey, if you haven't given that too much thought yet, we can suggest things. We've got some ideas and just go into it with an open mind.
Fantastic. Brilliant. And Nazim?
Yeah, I think that what I would also recommend is if you're actually wanting to make the move, you need to do something about it. So take that first step. I personally look over all the inquiries that come in, and if it's a go, we arrange a time to have a chat. If it's not, I always feel bad, but 100% honest and say, look, it's not going to happen. Wish you all the best. But at least once you've got that information, you're going to be able to better plan. And if it is something you want to do, then you can take that, those further steps.
Nazim, it just occurred to me as you're speaking right then is, the age limit for Australia generally is 45. You're a licensed immigration advisor for New Zealand as well. The age limit there is slightly different. So if there's anybody here who's thinking, wow, look, I really do want to get out of, your home country, and you do want to migrate Australia. I'm 48 years old. I can't do it. What are there options in New Zealand?
Oh, absolutely. So sometimes those emails are like, sorry, can't help for Australia, but strongly recommend New Zealand because you've got an occupation that's in demand here, or you've got, experience or skills that, you're under 56 years of age and, based on the number of years experience and qualifications you've got listed, New Zealand could be an option. There was someone I was speaking to, I think it was earlier this week, who's 44 and will be turning 45 very, very soon. So even though she's got a heart set on Australia, it's just not, it's highly unlikely to happen in the time frame that we've got available. But I pointed out that, maybe we look at New Zealand instead, and then you use New Zealand as a way to then eventually join all of your family in Australia. So if there is that alternative option, we'll let you guys know.
Yeah, and I guess that's just another reason why you do the eligibility assessment, because it'll give you that pathway, which is not the fastest pathway and not a bad pathway, but it's still a pathway.
Yeah.
So look, we don't want to take up too much time. We understand that this is your first step. We wanted to introduce ourselves, give you an overview of the current situation in Australia, what's happening with COVID, what's happening with the job market, and what are the general visas that you can use to move here. Most of this is very, very skills based, but the long-term, but the skills shortage lists are many, varied, and some are very, very extensive. So there are unbelievable amount of opportunities in a very massive country that has ongoing demand for skilled migrants. So, as I said at the beginning, we really, honestly, genuinely think that this is one of the best times ever to move to Australia, but you do want to be at the front of the queue. You don't want to be 1 millionth. You want to be in the first lot. So please fill in the form. We'll give you our feedback very quickly. And then what happens after that, just what happens. We're not saying that you must use us, of course, but, we're here to help as well. So from all of us, good evening or good afternoon, and we hope to engage with you again in the future. See you later. Goodbye.
Bye.